So, when it comes to sexual ethics, there's no place to write this, it's just something you need to be aware of. When it comes to sex ethics, I think, first of all, this is definitely going to be on your exam. Why? Because it's the only application for A2s. This, unlike the AS topics, you have to relate to all four. So, it could be natural or situational, cant or utilitarianism. So, they might ask you a question like, no ethical theory is helpful when dealing with issues surrounding sex ethics. That means that you can pick which theories you talk about. So you might want to compare natural law with utilitarianism, for example. Or it might say, Kant's ideas of duty are useful when dealing with issues surrounding homosexuality. So they could pick which issue, or they might keep the issues open. If it just says issues surrounding sex, then you need to do homosexuality, premarital or extramarital sex. Probably 2 out of the 3 would be fine for an answer. So that is as it stands though. So the first large box is all for premarital sex. So I'm just going to pop it all up there and you can work through it. So this is the only box we've got for premarital sex. The box underneath is going to be for extramarital sex. We then go into homosexuality. Pope Paul VI said, so that husband and wife become in way one heart and one soul and together attain their human fulfilment. From that, he is obviously emphasising this idea of man and wife, so husband and wife, man and woman, who become one heart and one soul. And then by becoming one heart and one soul, they then can achieve human fulfilment. It implies that if they are joined together as husband and wife, as man and woman, that they won't achieve human fulfilment. Obviously, that human fulfilment, again, very much purpose, telos, natural law Aquinas, because obviously the Catholic Church is heavily influenced by that. So explore what it implies, what it means. A trial marriage. So the Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about a trial marriage. It says, human love does not tolerate trial marriages. It demands a total and definitive gift of persons to one another. This idea there that trial marriage is where the couple intend to marry, but aren't quite married yet. So basically, they can have a bit of nookie, or they can move in together because they are going to get married. And no, the Catholic Church does not recognise that. It demands total giving from one person to another, as in marriage. So for the Catholic Church, premarital sex does not express fidelity, which is faithfulness, exclusivity and commitment, and consequently does not tolerate sex before marriage. What that's implying is people that have sex before marriage are unfaithful, have lots of partners and cannot be committed. Do you think that is fair? And again, in your exam, explore it. People who engage in premarital sex are committing a grave sin and are excluded from the sacramental communion until living in a morally correct way. How your priest would know that you're getting a little bit of hanky-panky the night before, but you're not living together or not married, I'm really not sure. But it says that you'll be excluded from sacramental communion. And obviously, God knows everything. So it's kind of that idea that even if your priest doesn't know, God knows. But this all comes from the idea that you cannot use contraception. So if you're having sex, you cannot use contraception because the only telos of sex is to procreate. And therefore, if you don't use contraception and then you get pregnant, you then have a child outside of wedlock, which is very much a, can't do. So that's why you can only have sex within marriage. Hence why brides wear white, because they are virgins, because they have not had premarital sex. Yet the Church of England does accept that cohabitation is for many people a step along the way towards the fuller and more complete commitment. So the Church of England does accept that people can live together before marriage. They're not saying have sex together before marriage, but they're just saying living together. With an essay on sex issues, sex problems, whatever it is, you have to use names, you have to use quotes, you have to use arguments, otherwise it can just become a very vague, blasé, waffly answer. So you do need to bring out things like this. Box underneath is going to be for extramarital sex. So extramarital sex, so this is just this box for this slide. Extra meaning more marital, more sex in your marriage, and so that's more sex with other people. This is how the church has actually protected women's rights. Lisa Sowell Cahill, in Sex, Gender and Christian Ethics, she argues that historically wealthy, powerful men had concubines. This is a lower status woman who lived with them like a wife, as well as wives. Remember, I always remember the concubine that Mary Daly talks about, the one that was let out and raped to death by men. So what she's arguing is that often very wealthy, powerful men had lots of mistresses, concubines, as well as their wife. Men having long-term relationships with several women, so polygamy, was common. Adultery was a crime that was virtually only women could be accused of, not men, because obviously a man wouldn't be an adulteress if he was polygamous. If a man could have multiple wives, concubines, mistresses, then obviously he can't be an adulteress because he can sleep with other people anyway. Whereas women were accused of being and following and being adulteresses. Divorce was exclusively a male prerogative. What that means is men could divorce their wives, wives could not divorce their husbands. And so the church came to the rescue. The church's ban on adultery made it impossible for men to have concubines, and the ban on divorce stopped men abandoning women. So because the church wouldn't let them have more than one wife, man and woman, together forever, that means that they banned adultery, not having multiple partners. It meant also that they couldn't have concubines, and because they frowned so heavily upon divorce in that way, it protected women, that it meant that their husbands couldn't just divorce them. So actually the church, according to Cahill anyway, argues that it actually protected women rather than went against them. You can of course bring in Mary Daly or Rosa Radford Ruth or anybody like that if you see a link. The remainder of this side of the coverall is going to be focused on homosexuality. You can bring in anything that you see as relevant within these three issues. So if you see articles, if you have examples, please bring them in. Obviously make it examples that an examiner could Google and find. But as we said, the recent article and quotes from Pope Francis on homosexuality, where we're going, would be very, very good. You can use tweets as quotes, because that's just a modern way of getting quotes out there, so you can use them. All right, box underneath then. In the skinny box of the three, I just want you to pick 2 or 3 of these different statistics to do with homosexuality, because all are true. 1 to 6 are all true. So the age of consent for sex between a man and a woman since 1885 has been 16, whereas it was 1967, men at 21. 1885 to 1967 before, so all of those years, nearly 100 years before it was seen as legal for men to have sex with other men, and the age was still 21. It was then lowered to 18 in 1994, and then in your lifetime, so in 2000, homosexuals could then be allowed in the armed forces. Your lifetime, you promote yourselves as being a really forward-thinking millennia generation. It's only been in your lifetime that people that were homosexual were actually allowed to do a certain job. Before then, they were not allowed to do a certain job, which was going to the armed forces. 2001, it was age 16 when homosexual men could have sex. 2002, where you could actually adopt children. And 2014, the same-sex marriage took place, the first same-sex marriage. So 2014, 4 years ago, the first same-sex marriage. That's very, very recent, and it shows how much we've changed and developed as a society towards homosexuality but it also shows you how homosexuality has been seen. This is for gay men, not for lesbians. It's very hard to see the laws around lesbianism. It's quite hard to really find the different ages, etc. Because I don't think it wasn't really recognised for a very long time.
The ones about sex, is it men generally?
So men. So all of them 1 to 6 is to do with homosexual men. Correct. So you can use just 1 or 2 of these as, again, examples. These are seen as statistics, there we go, to actually give your essay something less vague. It gives you evidence to back up your argument. Box in the middle, we're then going to bring in Christianity. So the box in the middle, why does the Bible and Christianity have a problem with homosexuality? These are some of the biblical passages you can draw upon, and so the one in the middle is for these passages. You need some biblical passages in there. So you could use the Leviticus. Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable. You have Deuteronomy. It prohibits shrine prostitution, where men and women are able to have sex with men for money. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously that's the most common one and the mostly used one, hence where the ideas of sodomy come from. This idea that the angels get taken in by Job. Job protects them for the night. The people of the village go up to Job's house and says, bring out the men that have come to you because we want to have sex with them. And then that's where Job says, no, don't do anything to my guests, but you can have my 2 virgin daughters. And then they say, oh, no, we don't want your virgin daughters. So very, very similar story to the one with the concubine as well, found in Judges. But that is Sodom and Gomorrah. That is a town, by the way. That's the town where homosexual acts happened. And God rained fire and brimstone upon them. Paul, so that's St. Paul, Paul noted that men committed shameful acts with other men. That was found in Romans 1. St. Paul as well, in a letter to the Corinthians, also wrote that men who have sex with men will not inherit the kingdom of God, so go to heaven. And Eve was made from Adam's rib. At the end of the day, God made Adam, Eve, not Steve. So because of that, it's the idea that it's silly, but it's true. God made man, woman. God did not make man within and make him another man. So with these, whenever you use biblical passages, you can go down your propositional, non-propositional route. You can go down your sola scriptura, reading only the Bible, the problems with the fact that Hayes presents a fantastic quote in Moral Principles, where he says that you should not read the Bible within a vacuum, and this idea that you have to recognise the cultural times it was written in. So homosexuality, these laws were written 2,000 years ago in a time that it suited. These are also in a time when people got nailed to crosses, fed to lions, and women were having babies at 12. So we're talking about a time that is very different from ours, but then people that read the Bible as their sole source of evidence, this then causes problems. So do explore this idea of using different biblical sources. Do your best to remember what book it's in. If you can't remember the 18 or the 23, etc., don't worry too much. It's more about the quote, and the book would help, because obviously the book often tells you who's either written it or whether it's Old or New Testament. Brilliant. Box to the side. Hang on though. What are the flaws with using the Bible and applying these to a modern debate? So just what I've just said then. You can use Gareth Moore, his point to back up this idea of using the text isn't always a reliable source for making your ethical decisions. Gareth Moore points out that many rules are not so forcefully imposed by Christians today, such as those that advocate beheading or those that forbid the wearing of garments made by 2 kinds of materials. So Leviticus and in laws, there's tons and tons and tons and tons of rules. Don't forget the Jewish people that follow the first 5 books have 613 mitzvah. These are 613 laws to follow. Christians follow the 10 commandments, but what about all the others? They seem to be forgotten about, like you can't eat meat and milk together, you can't eat the cow and what it produces for its calves or something like that, it says. You can't wear two types of fabric in your garments. Well, we don't really seem to hear much about them. You can't cut your sides of your facial hair or something. We don't hear those rules, though, every day now. So why are we still promoting that, oh, Sodom and Gomorrah, you can't be homosexual? So they seem to pick and choose which passages support their argument. So it seems for more that inconvenient rules are ignored, while others that pursue attacking minorities are supported. So the ones that they want to use are supported. There was, again, on Twitter, there was a humanist quote, again, I think I did tweet it, a humanist quote about gods represent the people that follow them, basically implying that the gods that people worship are more similar to the people that support them, and that backs this up. It's the idea that you pick the rules that you want in order to attack a minority because you ignore other rules. So you can use things like humanism against it as well, and humanism is in your secularisation topic. All right, two boxes underneath. One is for Church of England, one is for Catholics. So one in one side, one in the other. This is the Church's views then on homosexuality. The Church of England opposes same-sex marriage, therefore requires homosexual clergy to remain celibate. So they do not allow you to get married in a church. The churches do not allow you to have a homosexual marriage within the church. So if clergy, so priests, bishops, vicars, etc. If any of the clergy are homosexual, they have to remain celibate, meaning they cannot be in sexual relationships. They cannot have sex. Why? Because you couldn't have sex in marriage. In 2017, the bishops of the Church of England issued a statement called Marriage and Same-Sex Relationships. This affirmed that marriage is between a man and a woman. So within this, they said very clearly in 2017, marriage, man and woman.
I remember that there was a massive thing about it. Church of England had its first same-sex marriage. It was only a couple of years ago.
Google it. And was it in Scotland?
Yeah, I think so.
I thought it was
Well, it definitely won't be Catholic. Have a look, see what we can find. Although it is affirmed that there is a place for homosexuals in the church, and that there's some shame, and some repentance is appropriate for the way homosexuals have been treated. So whilst they're still saying you should get married as man and woman, they also recognise the amount of that they should feel shame, and they should say sorry for the way that homosexuals have been treated over the years because of the church's teachings. However, when taken for a vote with the General Synod, it was rejected. This whole document, everything was rejected, this idea of repenting against the way that homosexuals have been treated. The Church of England remains split over this, so there's even splits within the Church of England. Some want to recognise, support homosexuality, others do not.
Is
Anglican Church of England, yes.
It says the first same-sex wedding in an Anglican church in the UK has gone ahead.
And when was that?
September 2017.
Can we get some names? So September 2017. Is there any names of the couple?
Yeah, Alistair Dinney and Peter Matthews.
So Alistair Dinney and Peter Matthews were married in 2017 in the Church of England in the UK. That's very good. Yeah,
it was in Scotland though.
Oh, it was in Scotland, yeah. I was going to say something was ringing a bell.
Scotland, but it was the Church.
But it was still Church of England. Use that in your exam. The Catholic Church, on the other side, there is no sin involved in an inclination towards a member of the same sex, as such an inclination is not freely chosen and is a trial. So what they're saying is, it's not a sin if you have feelings for someone of the same sex, because it's only an inclination. You cannot help your inclinations, and that it is a trial, it's a test. Can anybody remember who we've come across that argues that the things that are in our lives are here to test us, to make us stronger? Nope, Augustine just believes we're all sinful. Who says that we have to deal with tests and trials in order to move from spiritual immaturity, and so that we can learn. John Hick, inspired by Irenaeus. Excellent. So yeah, John Hick, inspired by Irenaeus, does talk about this idea of a trial. Oh, yeah, Augustine just says we're sinful. Pope Francis, always a pleasure. On love in the family. There are absolutely no grounds for considering homosexual unions to be in any way similar or even remotely analogous, so an analogy, so comparison, to God's plan for marriage and family. Oh. So what he's saying there is homosexual unions are in no way similar to God's plan for marriage and family, meaning man and wife. So he's saying that no analogy, no similarity, no comparison can be made. However, he ate his words. The Pope backtracked when stats showed that 150 to 200 gay men were murdered in Italy every year. That statistic is taken from religioustolerance.org, so it is an online website. With this in mind, he said, if a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge? Is that really enough, though? Has he made the damage? Obviously, now he has just recently brought out about an article on homosexuality being recognised and being okay within the church, etc. Is he now not contradicting himself, but is he trying to modernise while still keeping the core of the Catholic Church? And does it really show the rock and the hard place that the Pope is between? That he wants to promote marriages in man and woman, whilst at the same time not promote prejudices against homosexuality. So that's the hardship that the Pope is currently in, and that's the trap he fell into. But this idea of a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, all of that sounds very kind of Karl Barth, a God's grace sort of idea, that as long as you, with your pluralism and exclusivism idea, so this idea that as long as you still seek God and you do it with goodwill, does it matter who you are? But at the end of the day, God is the ultimate judge. So who is the Pope to judge? Who are we to judge each other? You don't forget the glass house people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones idea. But still, when the Pope says things like that, it can cause a lot of problems. Excellent. Box at the bottom is for the changing face of the church. This is where we bring in the United Methodist Church. This is in the book of discipline. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry and with all persons. Fabulous quote. Fabulous message. You don't have to learn it all, obviously, because it's a long quote. But even if you just learn not to reject or condemn lesbian, gay members and friends, even you just remember that bit. Implore means beg. We implore you. Please don't reject them. Please don't condemn them because of their sexual inclination. And so this is about being in ministry together, ministry to God. Some Christian churches have gone further, challenging the traditional disapproval of homosexuality found in the Bible or natural law, maintaining that the quality of relationships is what determines its value. This is very much a Kantian ethics approach. Kant focuses on things like the quality of the relationship. Same as utilitarianism. Utilitarianism focuses very much on the quality of relationships. It's not whether you are married. At the end of the day, marriage does not make a good relationship. Rape in marriage was only recognised a few years ago as well as a crime because of this view that in marriage a wife should be willing to have sex with her husband. And so a lot of these ideas now focus more on actually the quality of the relationship than people just getting married. And I think statistically 1 in 3 marriages ends in divorce. So I think people now are recognising it's actually having it's better to focus on the quality of your relationship than just getting married. They believe that God made us all in the image of God, which is in Genesis, implying that all men and women, regardless of their sexual orientation, are by nature good. Otherwise, it implies God intentionally created disorder. Thus, many liberal Christians, including those belonging to the Methodist denomination, maintain that homosexuality is normal and natural and is not changeable or freely chosen. You can get a really good bit of discussion in your exam by using the different denominations against each other. You can bring in any of your Christian thought topics. Avoid bringing in other religions though, because obviously we haven't really discussed, so Judaism, Islam, etc. So do just stick with Christianity, and use this to link in things like with situation ethics or natural law instead. Brilliant. As soon as you're happy, turn over your sheets. Other side of this sheet is slightly more intense because these are your arguments. So top box is natural law, second two boxes situation ethics, third box Kant, next two utilitarianism, and then strengths and weaknesses are three of them. So that's where we're going with this. So top first box. So these are known as normative theories. You have normative ethics versus meta-ethics. Meta-ethics is looking at the language used. Normative... Are we all right? Okay, good. Normative ethics is these arguments. So if in the exam, I very much doubt they'd use this term, but if they did say, no normative theory is useful when dealing with issues surrounding sex and relationships, and you think, oh my goodness, what's normative? It's these. Normative is natural or situation ethics, Kant and utilitarianism. So these are normative approaches. Natural law then goes into that first top box. I'm just going to pop it up there and you can work your way through it. Right and wrong are fixed truths linking to what makes humans flourish. Obviously, humans flourish into godlike perfection. This idea of flourishing very much influenced by Aristotle's eudaimonia. The natural style of intercourse is to be observed. Not sure what Aquinas, our celibate monk, sees as natural style of intercourse. However, it's also a fairly good quote still. Catholic approaches to sexual ethics draws heavily upon natural law, so procreation is central to the purpose of sexual intercourse and marriage, and so you have to be married in order to have sex, and that sex is to procreate children. That is the telos or purpose of sex. Sex is to procreate. That means homosexual sex, premarital, extramarital, contraception and masturbation are all wrong because they do not support the precepts or a flourishing society. Sex might feel good, but this is an apparent good, not a real good. This is where, you remember in Aquinas' Conscience, he talks about how we have that sensuality still within us, but we always choose the good over the sensuality eventually. This is all linked in with that idea, as the sex might feel good, but that's when our sensuality is taking over rather than our synderesis, do good, avoid evil. Don't forget though, this bit at the bottom is very, very important. Sometimes the way that teachings and laws can be interpreted may change the conclusions drawn. For example, extramarital sex is seen on the surface as wrong. Having sex with somebody else because it doesn't help society, you shouldn't be having adultery, you shouldn't be having sex with somebody else that's not your husband or wife. However, it could also be seen as moral as a way of resolving infertility, such as in the Bible. In the Bible, Adam sired a child with his servant because his wife was infertile. So surrogate sex in this way, whilst extramarital, might not be frowned upon. And so it's about using language to imply or suggest something. Don't, with any application question, sex, euthanasia or business, under no circumstances ever use concrete language. By concrete language I mean natural law is against homosexuality. You're wrong, because there'll be some case, there'll be some doctrine of double effect application, there'll be some way you could make it so that it could be seen as morally right. So what you always do is you present possibilities. So extramarital sex could be seen as wrong because, however, it also could be seen as right or moral in this case. Same with premarital sex. You could find different alternatives, so just be very careful with the language you use. So you've always got things like the doctrine of double. This works with all arguments. So this works with utilitarianism, can, and situational ethics as well. Never use concrete language because we just don't know. It's about suggesting ideas and then looking at the different alternatives. An examiner won't think you're contradicting yourself. If you go, on the one hand it's this, but on the other hand it's that. That's the whole point of what you're meant to do. You're meant to weigh up the different ways this argument could be applied. So what you need to do is in your exam, if it says natural law and sex ethics or whatever it might be, put on your natural law Aquinas hat. Think, right, what would Aquinas say? How would he approach it? And so it's about thinking, people still follow these arguments today. There are natural lawists. How would they approach issues surrounding sex and relationships realistically? 2 boxes underneath for situation ethics. This is for the first box. Remember Joseph Fletcher's examples from situation ethics. He gives 2 examples. He gives 4 actually that we studied, but 2 of them link with sex. The woman in the prison of war camp who asked the guard who was not her husband to have sex with her to impregnate her so she could leave the camp, and then a spy who has sex with the enemy agent in order to end the war. And so Joseph Fletcher says, think about the agape in these situations. The woman wants to escape the prisoner of war camp, and so if she gets pregnant with another man's baby, that will happen in order for her to then return to her family. The spy is asked to have sex with the enemy so that they can find information about the war, so they can end the war. And so Joseph Fletcher focuses on agape. What is the most loving thing to do in these situations? Both of these examples, Fletcher argues, can be seen as ethical. However, Fletcher got a lot of criticism. He was criticised because people said that these are exceptional circumstances and not suitable for general moral theory. They don't help you in everyday life. But Fletcher said that's the whole point. That's the whole point of situation ethics. It's to help you deal with moral decisions when the usual moral rules don't apply. So what Fletcher's saying is that's the whole point. It's when your usual legalistic approach doesn't work, and you therefore need to bring in something else. When you're writing your essays in your exam, if they give you a topic in the question, so if they say situation ethics and sex, structure it with your 5-paragraph rule on situation ethics. Structure it with your 5 themes or 4 themes if you can't write, but we know 40 minutes is quite healthy now for timings. So structure it with your 5-paragraph links. Explain briefly what that theme is, link it to something specific within sexual, so homosexuality or premarital, extramarital sex, so link it to a specific point to do with sex, and then evaluate it. Is it useful, is it not? Only compare if the question asks you it's the best approach, or only compare if it says can and utilitarianism. You don't have to compare if you don't want to, because obviously you're bringing in a whole different level of analysis if you bring in another argument. If you do want to bring another argument for comparison, stick to the other same argument all the time. Don't, if it's situation ethics, don't then bring in Kant, then utilitarianism, then Christian. No, stick with the same comparative topic and stick with one theme from each of those as well. If you know you are going to compare, I'd stick with 3 to 4 paragraph themes. Don't try and push for your 5 because you're never going to cover 5 themes for each. So stick with 3 to 4 and do your most important themes first. So if it's natural law, do your primary precepts first. If it's Kant, do your duty first, whatever it might be. Was that hand, Jade? Are we all right? Yeah, fabulous. Box to the side is situation ethics continued. The question still stands though. Can situation ethics be applied to more day-to-day moral choices? Situation ethics focuses upon the particular situation, interests of the individual person, love and justice, selfless, unconditional love, which is not the same as erotic love. And so because of these 4 things, it does imply that it can be used in day-to-day practice. It does also imply that you might be permitted to break more traditional moral rules in making your day-to-day decisions. So traditional moral rules, things like you should get married before you have sex, well, you never want to get married. So in the interest of that individual, if they never want to get married, that means they can never have sex. That isn't really in the interest of that person. So if they meet somebody they would hope they'd spend the rest of their lives with, then the most loving thing for them to do in that situation is to have that sexual relationship. So it's about looking at the interest and that particular situation. It is a pragmatic approach. We know that because that's one of the four. Not propositions, you can call them propositions though, premises, one of the four of them. So pragmatic is one of the four, and that's about setting aside fixed moral truths in order to put person and their relationship at the heart of the decision. Situation ethics always is open to breaking traditional ethical rules. Do you remember when we first did situation ethics, we said that there's two main arguments. Legalistic, that's following the law, and anti-nominalism, that's the idea of breaking the rules, basically anarchy, doing whatever you want, never following any rules. And situation ethics falls in between that to say when the laws don't work, focus on love, focus on the individual, and it comes in between them. There's only one rule to follow, and that is unconditional love. That's the one universal law. And so what that's saying is it is open to breaking traditional ethical rules, including sex ethics rules, because decisions are made situationally, not prescriptively. Prescriptively means you prescribe a behaviour, you prescribe an action. It says not prescriptive, but about situation. However, difficulties do apply when with situation ethics to sexual ethics emerge, such as how other people are affected. This is a very, very important point. Situation ethics puts the primary people first, the particular situation, the interest of the individual, but what about broader family, community, interests of society? Do we consider society within the decisions that we make? So, for example, homosexuality might be in the best interest of the individuals, but what happens if your society, your culture is very, very much against it? You can't go to Saudi Arabia or Dubai and hold hands if you're not married. No matter if you're homosexual or heterosexual, you cannot even hold hands in public, because unless you're married, you cannot show public displays of affection. You can't share a room together. And so this idea of it might work for the particular situation or people, what about the community, the family, the interests of society that you're in? Any questions so far? Are we happy with this? Fabulous, you're doing really well. Kant underneath, there are a number of things at the heart of Kantian ethics, including autonomy. Obviously, autonomy is one of your three, postulates, thank you. Yeah, I was going through propositions, premises. Yes, postulates. Autonomy is one of Kant's postulates. A postulate is a solution to a problem, and so the solution is about being rewarded for doing your duty. You have to be free. Kant is very much an advocate for autonomy and freedom. Huge, huge supporter of liberation, this idea of free will. And so consent is priority for Kantian sexual ethics. Consensual promises, always considering the value of worth of the people involved. Of course it is, because you can't use the means to an end. Dignity, equality and equal rights. And so things like universalizability, this idea of applying maxims or general rules to everyone, can be used. What I would say is, let's just go through those. When we did this in lesson, we had a look at how universalisability, I actually remember us having quite a long and good discussion with this one. We talked about universalisability and can you apply to things like homosexuality. So if everybody in the world was homosexual, would something bad happen? Well, there would be no procreation. But you can narrow your maxims down to say if everybody that wanted to be homosexual was homosexual, would something bad happen? Well, no. So the maxim is if you want to be homosexual, you can. So sometimes it's about narrowing your maxims down. Universalisability, can everybody have extramarital sex? Can everybody have be married and have sex with other people? Well, maybe not, because what happens what's the point of getting married in the first place? The whole point of marriage to be with one person just doesn't work. So have a look at how universalisability works for each of these. Obviously, cancer examples were suicide, neglecting one's talents, refraining from helping others, and lying promise. Is it a lying promise? Are you making promises, oh yeah, just me and you, and then you have sex with somebody else? Are you breaking that promise? Also, this idea of can you find alternatives? So it's always saying it could be this, but it could be that. So do explore universalisability in as many ways as you can. Second formulation is means to an end. Don't treat others as a means to your own pleasures. So no rape, no forced marriage, and no objectifying people such as pornography. Sex within marriage is about union and sexual enjoyment, not just procreation. So Kant didn't mind a bit of sexual enjoyment within the marriage as well. Don't forget, Kant never got married, bless him. Believed he never had a girlfriend either. But unlike our celibate monk that says only have sex in marriage in the natural style, Kant is open to this idea of sexual enjoyment. Excellent. You're doing really well, everyone. Utilitarianism, 2 boxes, 1 slide in each box. So this slide goes in the first box. I'll just pop it up and then you can see how much is going to be in there. Often called libertarianism. Libertarianism, again, meaning free will. It's about consenting adults. So this is Bentham and Mill, but Mill's in the next box as well. But so this is Bentham specifically and more closely as well. It's about consenting adults. Don't forget, an adult really in this country is 16. I mean, you can't vote until you're 18. You can't drink alcohol till you're 18. So we're talking about adults here. Utilitarianism would not support premarital sex, having sex when you're about 13, because you cannot fully consent to your choices, to your actions. You don't know what it is that you're doing. I don't mean as far as, you know, actual sex, because most people can suss that quite quickly. I mean, you don't know the implications of having sex when you're that young. So utilitarianism does say about it being consenting adults who know what it is that they're doing. It protects against freedom of choice. Utilitarianism is huge on what is called the harm principle. That's very, very important. It does exactly what it says in the name. You have to consider the harm caused by the actions that you do. So long-term harm of things like extramarital affairs. Long-term harm of having premarital sex, not using contraception and getting pregnant. Or long-term harm of having premarital sex, not using contraception and getting chlamydia and not knowing about it and then being infertile 15 years later. We're talking about the long-term harm of these things. And so it does praise safe sex to avoid unwanted pregnancies, HIV, STIs and broken hearts. All involve pain. Bentham wanted the greatest well-being for everyone, thus believed that the rules of marriage protect those involved against pre- and extramarital sex. So Bentham was again an advocate of marriage because marriage protects people. However, questions do arise though, such as, who do you consider the happiness and pleasure of? Is it just the people involved or the wider society? So again, does homosexuality harm society and cause unhappiness for the majority who may be opposed to same-sex relationships? So utilitarianism is very much behind closed doors. If you both consent, anything's allowed. But when you bring it out into the wider society, so for example, if you are a homosexual couple, you walk down the street holding hands and kissing, etc., are you going to cause harm to society and unhappiness? Because you have to consider the majority in utilitarianism. Whether you agree with it or not, it is about maximum happiness for the majority, not minority. box to the side, the final box for utilitarians before we bring in our evaluation. Mill presents more of secular views. Whilst Mill's arguments are linked to Christianity, Mill does support things like the Golden Rule, etc., and he's trying to make utilitarianism more popular by showing the links with Christianity. It can be seen as a secular view, meaning non-religious. John Stuart Mill was concerned with the extent to which religion forbids certain behaviours, envisaging a free, liberal society moving away from the constraints of religion. Mill fought for artificial contraception being available to the poor. This was something that was prohibited by the church at the time and still remains forbidden by the Catholic Church today. That is contraception, using contraception. Artificial meaning condoms, the pill. Withdrawal method is contraception, it's just not artificial. And so Mill fought for artificial contraception. He lived in like 1864 or something like that. We're talking about a couple of hundred years ago. This was quite astronomical. The pill was only made available in 1974, like 100 years later. So obviously don't quote me directly on those dates, that's just from the top of my head. But we're talking about a very, very early on view here that was not recognised or listened to until far more recently. He also fought for women's rights, he fought for gender equality, and he focused on the idea that marriage that promotes equal partnerships, specifically focusing on how the church and law constrains women. He says sex is a principle of perfect quality, admitting no power or privilege on the one side nor disability on the other. And he wrote a book, a very famous book called On Liberty. I think his wife must be squeezing his shoulder a bit there. Come on, husband, you know what to say. But John Stuart Mill was a huge advocate for these areas. Behind every great man is an even better woman, or an even louder woman, maybe. So, quite likely, they will keep it open for you, so you can pick which ethical theories you use. So it'll be very, very obvious. It'll say something like no theory is helpful when dealing with issues surrounding sex ethics, or no theory is helpful when dealing with issues surrounding premarital sex. You can then pick which ones you would rather talk about. If it is specified, keep that as your structure. You have to keep this simple. If you can avoid an application question, I don't see it being possible. I think they're going to ask you 2 out of the 4, so I don't think you're going to be able to avoid it. If you can avoid it, I do recommend it. Why? Because it's by far the hardest you have to do. These are the hardest questions because you are not only balancing one argument, you've got to link it specifically to an example whilst evaluating and potentially comparing it. Very, very difficult structure. Doable, but you have to keep it controlled. You have to keep your themes very tight. You have to make sure that you know what are your themes of your paragraphs and stick to those with your examples. So you need to be really strict with your structure with these ones. Otherwise, before you know it, you've lost where you're at and you've lost your times, etc. Right, final 3 boxes are for evaluation. So natural law, I'm just going to put it up there and we'll just fire through these as quick as we can. These are a few weaknesses against natural law. Obviously, there's strengths as well. The strengths you can find on the actual natural law PowerPoint. We did some strengths on that one together. You can bring them all in, so these are just a few more. Is it unnatural? Is an unnatural act always wrong if it's mutual and consented to? So just because it's unnatural, is it really, is it wrong if it's something consented to? And is what is natural always right? What about sexual abuse within marriage? So Aquinas would argue that you're married, good, having sex, good. If that sex is forced, would Aquinas really have a problem with that? So it might be natural, doesn't mean it's right. It's illogical to say that an infertile couple cannot have sex, because again, you should only have sex to procreate. So you can't have children, you therefore can't have sex. How is that logical? Aquinas was celibate. He said that it's an excuse for the minority called to serve God. But you're still celibate, Aquinas. You're still talking about things you have no clue about. And you're also not practicing what you preach. You're not married and reprocreating the earth. Yeah, okay, you're celibate and you're not having babies within marriage. Therefore, are you really the right person to speak about these things and influence the most influential institution in the world? Can masturbation and homosexuality actually be argued to be natural? Now, don't get too carried away, folks. We're not writing the next 50 Shades of Grey in our exam. However, homosexuality, obviously there's many animals in the animal kingdom that show homosexual tendencies. So is it natural if animals in the animal kingdom are doing it? What is unnatural is homophobia. We are the only species that are homophobic. And so what you can look at, masturbation, that idea of can it be seen as natural, the release of hormones. Is it natural to only have one partner and a monogamous relationships if sex is centred purely on reproduction? At the end of the day, the animal kingdom, animals go for the most fertile female. And so they procreate. Sorry, excuse me. They move from partner to partner. Is monogamy actually unnatural, having one partner for your whole life? Liza argues to condemn people for using their sexual organs for pleasure, such as elderly couples cannot reproduce, reveal prejudices, irrational taboos and society. By elderly couples, some women start the menopause in their 40s and 50s, so we're not talking like 90-year-olds trying to get it on. We are talking about, you know, women that have the menopause, therefore can no longer have children, therefore it implies you cannot have sex because you can't reproduce. But what about loving relationships? What about pleasure still within that relationship and that sex? Finally, without contraception, the world would be overpopulated and spread STIs. Box in the middle is for Kant. I've not added situation X on here. You can add your own again, and you've got the PowerPoint from when we did it the first time round to get a few ideas. Emphasises the importance of equality and not treating others as a tool for your own pleasure. It recognises the importance of pleasure within marriage and the idea of recognising the other person as free. However, it does ignore the importance of emotions, and just because something can't be universalised does not mean it is wrong. Once again, none of this is evaluation until you add a critical word, until you do something with these. And obviously, again, do not just clump them all in one paragraph. Integrate them into your answers, bring them in throughout. As soon as you see a potential strength or problem, raise it. Whenever I mark your work, once I'm past the introduction and I'm into your first paragraph, I read about 3 sentences, then I'm thinking, right, where's the evaluation? If I read another 3 and then another 3, I'm thinking, well, you haven't evaluated very much, have you? So it's about bringing in evaluation as much as you can. Even start your paragraphs with arguably or a synonym. Okay, for that word, because you don't want to start every paragraph with the same word. But that helps you remember, oh, I need to evaluate this. Don't retell the arguments. Your examiners know the arguments. Believe me, they've taught them, so they know them. It's about evaluating it, giving them something new to get their teeth into. Final slide, final set of evaluative points. If you haven't quite got them all down, because obviously we are going quite quick now, if you don't get them all down, please do just go back to the PowerPoint in your own time. Final one, utilitarianism, there we go. Emphasises the importance of pleasure. It looks at freedom and choice, looks at consent and equality. It's realistic, it promotes contraception and safe sex. It's flexible and subjective, however, it's hard to apply the Donic calculus. You go on a night out and you pull. Yes, I've pulled. You then say, then go, so, how are we going to do this? And you think, let me consult my hedonic calculus. So, what is the duration of our pleasure going to be? How intense is it going to be? What is the extent of our pleasure? Is your neighbours going to get involved? You get the idea. It's unrealistic. Quite funny. But it's unrealistic. It's hard to apply. It doesn't help in specific situations. Mill says that sex is a lower pleasure, but don't humans experience sex differently to animals? Sex is more important for humans because it's about love, honesty, commitment. We read books about sex. This is like Kama Sutra. There's different. Humans do it more than just like animals. That I really should rephrase that, shouldn't I? Sex means more to humans than it does to animals. Animals, it is purely to procreate, whereas for humans, it is about that commitment to another person. Teleological can always predict the outcomes, so you might, you might start that relationship, you might think this is going to last forever, and then it doesn't. You can't predict outcomes. And finally, do emotions and passion cloud your judgment? Are there any questions? Well done, everyone.